Hello, econ students. We're ready to talk about competition in the long run. Remember, in the short run, firms observe the market price and then make their production choices. In the long run, we're primarily interested with entry and exit into and out of the market. So any question that's asking you about what happens in the long run is asking about whether or not firms are entering or exiting the market, and then the effect that that will have on the market. So let's think about how firms decide when to stay in business, when to go out of business, when to get into a new business. It all has to do with profit. When profits are negative in the long run, a firm will go out of business. We talked in the last video about how firms might stay in business in the short run with negative profits. But clearly, if profits are negative day after day, month after month, the firm will leave the market. So if firms have negative profit in the long run, they will exit the market. And what does that mean? It means we have fewer suppliers, and supply of the product will decrease. You remember what happens when supply decreases or shifts to the left? It means a decrease in quantity and an increase in price. And of course, increasing prices mean more revenue for the remaining firms in the market. So profits for the remaining firms will be increasing. Likewise, if profit is greater than zero, we're going to have more firms entering the market. If you see a restaurant out there selling hot chicken and it's killing it, right? There's long lines, it's making a ton of money. What's going to happen almost immediately is more restaurants selling a similar product will open up, right? We see something profitable, other companies will try to imitate that product. So as profits are positive in the long run, firms will enter the market. And of course, increasing number of producers is going to increase supply of that product, decreasing prices. All of this happens until profit is equal to zero, right? As long as profit is negative, profits are going to be increasing as prices increase. As long as profits are positive, prices are going to be decreasing profit until we get to zero. At zero, there is no force for change in this model, which means that profit equal to zero is our long run competitive equilibrium point, right? It's the point in our system where nothing is changing. If we're not at profit equal to zero, then the market is going to be pushing us back towards that point. It is important to remember that market equilibrium is not necessarily someplace that we live, right? It's not somewhere we always are, but it does help us understand how markets function because we are always moving towards that point. Now, Adam Smith used this long-run competitive equilibrium concept to help us understand how competitive markets benefit society. And there are really two main points here I want to make about how competitive market forces, this drive for profit, helps us as a society. So the first is that when we have profit equals zero, remember where that point is on your graph, right? Our profit equals 0 point is at the minimum of the average total cost curves. The average total cost curve, right? And what that means is that we're going to be producing products in the most efficient way, right? At the lowest cost, right? So if we're going to produce t-shirts or chicken sandwiches or whatever it is we're producing, I'm going to get the same number of sandwiches at a lower cost in a competitive market. Okay, so products are produced in a way that minimizes the cost of production. We're at the minimum point of the average total cost curve. When we're at the profit equal to 0 point. Okay, the second thing that's important here is that that firms are always going to try to innovate to produce products that consumers want to buy, right? So firms are constantly trying to produce products that people want. Okay, in other words, supply responds to demand. Okay, in a free market economy, what that means is that no one sits down and thinks about how many cars do we need and how many chicken sandwiches do we need and how many t-shirts do we need, right? Nobody sits down and plans out how much will be produced of each product like you would in a central planning economy. And the good thing about that is that the economy is dynamic. Consumers are always changing what they want to buy. And when we have a competitive market, say demand in one area goes up, prices in that market will go up, that market becomes more profitable, firms will then enter that market, right, to increase supply, right? Consumers decide they want more of something, then the market will function to supply that product. Consumers decide they want less of something, same thing. The market will reallocate those productive resources to a different industry. So we sit down and we want to say, how do we take our scarce resources and use them to produce something that we want, right? No one has to sit down and figure that out, because the profit motivation, the fact that firms are trying to earn profits, means that they will individually sort across industries in order to supply what consumers need. And that process, right, is sort of what Adam Smith referred to as the invisible hand of the market. The way that the market moves resources from one sector to another in order to respond to consumer consumer needs or consumer wants. All right, so your video for this section of the course is actually a little bit more about the invisible hand, about Adam Smith and his thoughts about how markets function. So I'll leave the rest of this discussion for that video. But the last thing I want to say is that there are a lot of good things about profit motivation, but there also can be some downfalls, right? Like when we see firms taking advantage of consumers, okay, raising prices above their costs, right? Maybe in a monopoly situation, charging consumers a lot of money to make profits at the expense of society, that's clearly bad, right? So profit motivation is not always going to lead to good outcomes for society, but it's important to recognize the good things about profit motivation, and then we'll talk more about the bad things about profit motivation when we get to the monopoly lectures. All right. Okay, good. So let's put some numbers on this. This graph, I think, is probably the single scariest picture for students in the course, but really all you need to do is just take a deep breath, because you already know how this graph works, okay? So you've seen this graph, you know how to use this graph, right? We did that in the last video. All right, you know how to use supply and demand. Don't freak out, you know how supply and demand works, okay? Here we've just put both graphs next to each other so that we can understand how firms in this market might behave in the short run, and also what will happen in the long run in terms of both the individual firm and the market. So just take a deep breath, we'll walk through this. These graphs really are not as complicated as they look, okay? All right, so in the short run, the firm observes the market price and makes its production decisions. In the short run, the firm observes the price and makes production decisions. Okay? In the long run, there is entry or exit until profits equal 0. Okay? This is everything you need to know here to solve these problems. So, the first question, right, has to do with the short run. What is the market equilibrium price for shoes? All right, I guess we're making shoes. All right, you know how to figure this out. What's the market equilibrium price? Supply equals demand. Supply and demand will set the market equilibrium price. All I have to do here is look at where supply equals demand, and I've got price is 80. Okay, supply equals demand gives me a price of 80. Not so bad. All right, now, how many shoes will each firm produce in order to maximize profits in the short run? And how much profit will they earn? All right, remember, this is exactly what we did in the previous video. The firm observes the price, right? Price is 80. Firm is like, okay, price is 80. I'm going to come over to my marginal cost curve and produce a quantity of 200. And then profit, I'll just write this up here. Profit is price minus average total cost times quantity. So I've got my price already, that's 80. I've got my quantity already, that's 200. I just need to find my average total cost. And to do that, we just come up from 200 to the average total cost curve. Okay, now I gotta go back over here. And I can see that my average total cost is 64. So I can plug that into a calculator, and I've got that profits will be 3,200. I can even label the profit area on my graph. Right? It would be the distance between price and average total cost times quantity. There we go. We've got short run profits. All right, so that's basically the same thing that we did in the last video, right? We just observe the market price, then the firm makes its production choice, we're done. What is happening in the long run? Okay, in the long run, now we want to pay attention to entry or exit. So the first question is, what do you predict will happen to the number of firms producing shoes in the long run? Well, profits in the short run were positive, so firms are going to enter the market, right? In other words, the number of firms in the market will increase in the long run. When the number of firms increases, what's going to happen to our supply equation? It's going to shift out, right? It's going to get bigger. We have more firms, we have more supply, so supply will shift to the right, will shift out until what? Until profits are equal to 0. So this point here, profits equal 0, that's our long run competitive equilibrium. But we are not asking here about the individual firm, we're asking about what is the equilibrium quantity and price in the market. So I know this point gives me my long run competitive equilibrium where profits are equal to 0. That's a price of 60. Okay. And supply then I know is going to shift out until it intersects the demand curve, giving us a new market price of 60 so that profits are equal to 0 for the individual firm. So in the market for shoes, in the long run, the equilibrium price will be 60 and the equilibrium quantity here is 25. Looks like that's 1,000 shoes. The way I found that point was to first find my profit equals 0 point on the individual firm graph. That'll tell me my price. Then what I want to do is just look along my demand curve for that price, and that will give me my market equilibrium quantity. Right. The last question is meant to be simple, okay? Not trick, simple, okay? So how many shoes will each individual firm sell? 125 at the profit equals 0 point. And how much profit will they earn? 0, right? 0. In the long run, profit is always equal to 0. All right. So, good. We've solved the long run competitive equilibrium problem. I have another one here that I would like you to work through on your own. Same questions, okay? Same type of graphs, different numbers. You work through this problem. I will post the solutions and I will also post a video going through the problem in case you want to watch that as well. All right, good. So I'll do this and then we have one more topic, one more piece of new material to do for this topic, and that is economic profit versus accounting profit. Let me know if you have questions. Please post questions on the discussion boards, and I will see you in the next video.